The stranger in the storm. The desert winds howled like vengeful spirits, carrying grains of red sand across the barren landscape of Velser 3. Ethan pulled his scarf tighter around his face, shielding himself from the storm as he trudged forward. It was supposed to be a simple scavenging trip. He had spotted wreckage from an old Imperial transport earlier that day and figured he could salvage something useful. But now, as the storm intensified, he began questioning his decision. Just as he was about to turn back, he saw it, a figure lying half-buried in the sand. Ethan hesitated. It wasn't uncommon to find bodies in the wastelands. Velser 3 wasn't kind to travelers, and the Empire had abandoned this sector years ago. But something about this person was different. Cautiously, he approached, brushing away the sand. It was a girl. Her skin was pale, almost glowing under the dim light of the storm, and intricate blue markings traced patterns along her arms and neck. Her clothes were tattered, revealing wounds along her side. She was still breathing, but barely. "Damn it," Ethan muttered. He wasn't a hero. He didn't take in strays. But leaving her here meant death. With a sigh, he lifted her onto his shoulders and began the long trek back to his shelter. When Lyris awoke, she was met with the dim glow of a fire and the scent of something burning. Panic flared inside her. She sat up too quickly, her vision swimming. "Easy," a voice said. She turned sharply. A man stood across from her, stirring a pot over the fire. His dark brown hair was messy from the wind, and his clothes were patched together from various scraps of fabric. "Where am I?" Lyris asked, her voice hoarse. "My place," he replied. "Found you in the storm. Looked like you were dying." Lyris pressed a hand to her temple. Her head throbbed. Memories flitted in and out of reach, like whispers she couldn't quite hear. "Who are you?" she asked. "Ethan." He leaned back against a crate, watching her with cautious eyes. "What about you?" She opened her mouth, then hesitated. Her name. She could remember her name. But that was it. "Lyris," she finally said. Ethan nodded. "You got a last name?" She searched her mind. "Nothing. I don't know." Ethan frowned but didn't press. "Well, Lyris, you've got 2 broken ribs, dehydration, and some nasty cuts. You're lucky I found you." She glanced down at herself. Her arms were wrapped in bandages, and her wounds had been cleaned. "Thank you." Ethan shrugged. "Don't mention it. But I gotta ask, why were you out there?" Lyris stared at the fire. Images flashed in her mind, stars, a ship, voices shouting. But every time she tried to focus, they slipped away. "I don't know," she whispered. Ethan sighed. "Figures." Before she could respond, a loud beep echoed through the small shelter. Ethan swore under his breath and grabbed a nearby communicator. A voice crackled through. "Imperial scouts just landed near the old refinery. They're searching for something, or someone." Ethan's gaze flickered to Lyris. "You wouldn't happen to know why the Empire's suddenly interested in Velser 3, would you?" Lyris's chest tightened. She didn't know who she was. She didn't know where she came from. But one thing was clear. Whoever she was, the Empire wanted her. The forgotten past. Ethan shut off the communicator and stared at Lyris. His expression wasn't angry, but it wasn't exactly friendly, either. "So," he said, rubbing his jaw. "Care to explain why the Empire is suddenly interested in this dustball of a planet?" Lyris's pulse quickened. The truth was, she had no idea. Her memories were still a scattered mess, fragments of something important just out of reach. "I don't know," she admitted. I don't remember anything except my name." Ethan exhaled through his nose, running a hand through his unkempt hair. Of course you don't. A tense silence stretched between them. Outside, the storm had died down, leaving the desert eerily quiet. Finally, Ethan stood. Look, I'm not saying I believe you. But if the Empire is looking for you, we have a problem. Why? Lyris asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan gestured around the small shelter. You think they're just gonna knock on my door and ask nicely if I've seen a mysterious girl wandering around? No. They'll burn this whole place down looking for you. Guilt settled heavily in Lyris's chest. Then I should go. Ethan scoffed. And do what? Wander into the desert again? You wouldn't last an hour. He was right. As much as she hated feeling like a burden, she had nowhere to go. No plan. No idea who she even was. Before she could respond, the door to the shelter slid open, and a wiry man stepped inside. He had graying hair, oil-stained clothes, and a mechanical brace wrapped around his left arm. We got trouble, he said, glancing at Ethan. Lyris tensed. Orin, Ethan greeted him. I figured as much. The Empire's on the move. Orin grunted. Not just the Empire. Bounty hunters too. Word is, there's a massive reward for some lost heir. Lyris flinched. Ethan's eyes darkened. How big of a reward? Orin smirked. Big enough that every lowlife in the Outer Rim is gonna want a piece of it. Ethan glanced at Lyris. You sure you don't remember anything? Because it sounds like you're worth a fortune. She swallowed hard. I don't know why they're after me. Orin studied her for a moment, then turned to Ethan. We should get moving. If bounty hunters are already here, the Empire won't be far behind. Ethan nodded. Agreed. But first. He grabbed the small device he had found with Lyris. This thing was on you when I found you, he said, turning it over in his hands. Orin, think you can crack it? Orin snatched the device and inspected it. Huh. Looks like some kind of encrypted data drive. Give me an hour. An hour later, the small shelter was filled with the hum of old computers as Orin worked on decrypting the device. Lyris paced nervously. Every time she tried to force her memories to return, she hit a wall. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You getting anything? Orin grunted. This encryption is old. Really old. Whoever made this didn't want just anyone accessing it. Suddenly, the screen flickered. A glowing star map appeared, swirling with golden lines. Lyris gasped. The moment she saw the map, something deep inside her stirred. She knew this place. Orin whistled. Well, would you look at that? Ethan squinted at the hologram. What are we looking at? Lyris hesitated. I think it's a star map. Orin nodded. Not just any star map. These coordinates lead to an old sector. Abandoned worlds. Forgotten ruins. Ethan's brow furrowed. Why would she have this? Before anyone could answer, the shelter's alarm system blared. Someone was outside. Orin cursed, shutting off the screen. Ethan grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. A group of figures stood outside, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light. Bounty hunters. Ethan turned to Lyris. Stay out of sight. She nodded, pressing herself against the wall as Ethan and Orin stepped outside. The lead bounty hunter, a tall man with a cybernetic eye, grinned. Evening, gentlemen, he drawled. I'm looking for someone. Maybe you've seen her? Ethan crossed his arms. Can't say I have. The bounty hunter smirked. Funny. Because my scanners say otherwise. He gestured, and two armed men stepped forward. Hand her over, and we walk away, the hunter said. Fight us, and, well, things get messy. Lyrissa's heart pounded. She didn't know who she was. She didn't know why they wanted her. But one thing was clear. She wasn't safe anymore. Hunted and on the run. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle, his jaw clenched. Oren stood beside him, his mechanical arm humming softly as he adjusted his stance. They were outnumbered, but that had never stopped them before. The bounty hunter with the cybernetic eye grinned, clearly enjoying the tension. "Come on now," he said, tapping the side of his metal skull. "We all know how this ends. Give me the girl, and no one has to die." Lyris crouched inside the shelter, heart pounding. She could barely breathe as she listened to the exchange. Ethan's voice was steady. "That's not gonna happen." The bounty hunter sighed dramatically. "Shame." Without warning, he raised his blaster and fired. Lyris barely had time to react as the world outside erupted into chaos. Energy blasts streaked through the night, illuminating the dusty landscape with flashes of red and blue. Ethan dove behind cover, returning fire with precise shots. Oren's mechanical arm whirred as he pulled a modified blaster from his belt, sending a controlled burst of energy at the attackers. Lyris pressed herself against the wall, panic rising in her chest. She wasn't a soldier. She didn't know how to fight. But something deep inside her whispered that she had seen battle before. The bounty hunters moved quickly, their numbers giving them an advantage. One of them, a reptilian alien with razor-sharp teeth, flanked the shelter's entrance. Lyrissa's breath hitched. He was coming for her. She scrambled backward, her eyes darting around the room. She needed a weapon. Anything. Her gaze landed on a metal pipe near the workstation. Outside, Ethan shouted, "Lyris, run." But she wasn't going to run. She grabbed the pipe and swung just as the reptilian hunter lunged inside. The impact was clumsy, but it was enough to knock him off balance. The hunter snarled, his yellow eyes locking onto hers. Before he could recover, a shot rang out. He crumpled to the ground, smoke rising from the fresh wound in his chest. Ethan stood behind him, his rifle still aimed. "Nice try," he muttered before turning to Lyris. "We need to go. Now." She nodded, her hands trembling as she dropped the pipe. Oren had already activated a hidden escape hatch in the shelter's floor. "Get in," he shouted. Ethan pushed Lyris toward the hatch. She slid down, landing in an underground tunnel dimly lit by flickering lights. Oren followed, sealing the entrance behind them. The sounds of battle faded, replaced by the distant hum of old machinery. Ethan exhaled. That was too close. Lyris tried to steady her breathing. Who were they? Oren dusted off his clothes. Bounty hunters. Not Empire soldiers, which means someone outside the Empire wants you just as bad. Lyris swallowed hard. Why? Ethan glanced at her. You still don't remember anything? She shook her head. He ran a hand through his hair. Then we need to find out. The underground tunnel stretched for miles, leading them toward a hidden hangar where Oren kept his old ship. As they walked, Lyris kept glancing at Ethan. He had risked his life for her. Why? You didn't have to save me, she said quietly. Ethan scoffed. Yeah, well, letting you get captured wasn't exactly an option. She frowned. Why not? Ethan hesitated before replying, because I don't like watching innocent people die. Lyris wasn't sure she was innocent. But she didn't argue. When they finally reached the hangar, Oren immediately started prepping the ship for launch. The vessel was old but sturdy, its exterior patched with different metals from years of repairs. Ethan placed a hand on the hull. Still holding together? Oren smirked. Barely. Lyris hesitated at the entrance. If she got on that ship, there would be no turning back. Ethan noticed her hesitation. "You coming?" She took a deep breath. Then she stepped forward. As the ship's engines roared to life, Lyris knew one thing for sure. Her past was coming for her. And she wasn't ready. Shadows of the past. Lyris sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring out the window as the ship broke through the planet's atmosphere. The stars stretched endlessly before her, but instead of feeling a sense of freedom, dread coiled tight in her stomach. Ethan sat beside her, his hands steady on the controls. Orin stood behind them, his cybernetic arm resting on the back of Ethan's chair. "Destination?" Orin asked. Ethan glanced at Lyris. "We need answers. And fast." Orin nodded. "I know a guy. Old contact from my smuggling days. If there's data on Lyris out there, he can find it." Lyris swallowed hard. "Where?" Orin sighed. "Station 99. It's not exactly friendly." Ethan tightened his grip on the controls. "Great. A death trap." Orin smirked. "Pretty much." As they neared the station, Lyris could see it floating in the darkness, an enormous sprawl of interconnected ships, asteroids, and scavenged parts, held together by sheer desperation. The docking bay was crowded with traders, bounty hunters, and criminals. Ethan adjusted his jacket, tucking his blaster into his belt. "Stay close." Lyris nodded. They walked through the market, past vendors selling illegal weapons, alien tech, and things Lyris didn't even recognize. Orin led them to a small, dimly lit shop tucked between two larger structures. Inside, an old alien with 4 eyes and a hunched posture sat behind a cluttered counter. "Orin," the alien rasped. "Didn't think I'd see you again." Orin grinned. "Yeah, well, I need some info." The alien's 4 eyes flicked to Lyris. "On her?" Lyris stiffened. Ethan stepped forward. "What do you know?" The alien tapped a console, scanning through files. After a moment, he whistled low. "She's got a price on her head big enough to buy this station." Lyris's blood ran cold. Ethan's expression darkened. "Who put the bounty out?" The alien hesitated. "It's complicated." Orin leaned forward. "We don't have time for riddles." The alien sighed. "The Empire wants her, yeah. But there's another name tied to this bounty. Someone powerful." He turned the screen toward them. Lyris's breath caught in her throat. She was staring at a name she didn't recognize, but something about it sent a chill through her veins. Ethan frowned. "Who is that?" The alien looked at Lyris. "You don't know?" She shook her head. The alien exhaled sharply. "Then you're in more trouble than I thought." As they left the shop, Lyris felt like the walls of the station were closing in on her. Ethan walked beside her. "Are you okay?" She forced a nod, but she wasn't. She had no memory of who she was, yet powerful people wanted her dead, or captured. Why? Orin was ahead of them when he suddenly froze. Ethan grabbed Lyris's arm, pulling her behind him. A group of heavily armed men blocked their path. The bounty hunters. Again. The leader, the one with the cybernetic eye, grinned. "Thought you could run forever?" Ethan reached for his blaster. The bounty hunter sked. "Ah-ha. I wouldn't." More hunters stepped out from the shadows. They were surrounded. Lyris's heart pounded. "Surrender," the leader said. "Or this gets ugly." Ethan glanced at Lyris. She made a decision. A memory flickered in her mind. A training ground. A fight. A voice telling her how to move. How to survive. Before she could process it, her body moved on instinct. She spun, knocking a hunter's weapon from his hands. Everything happened at once. Ethan fired. Orin swung his mechanical arm, sending one of the attackers flying. Lyris ducked under a blade, grabbing a fallen blaster. Her hands knew how to use it before her mind did. Shots rang out. One by one, the bounty hunters fell. Until only the leader remained. He stared at Lyris, something like recognition flashing in his mechanical eye. "You," he whispered. Before he could say more, Orin shot him. The leader crumpled. Silence. Lyris stood, her hands shaking. Ethan stepped toward her. "That was," he hesitated. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Lyris swallowed hard. She didn't know. But a terrifying thought crept into her mind. What if she wasn't just some lost girl? What if she was dangerous? Back on the ship, she sat alone, staring at her hands. Orin patched up a wound on Ethan's arm. "She's not just some runaway," he said quietly. "She's trained." Ethan nodded. "I know." Lyris looked at them. "What if I was one of them?" Ethan frowned. "One of who?" She hesitated. "The people hunting me." Orin exhaled. "There's only one way to find out." Ethan nodded. "We go to the Empire." Lyris's stomach twisted. Was she ready for the truth? The truth revealed. The journey to the Empire's core world was tense. Lyris barely spoke, her mind filled with endless questions. Ethan piloted the ship in silence, while Orin checked his weapons repeatedly, a habit he had when nervous. Station 99 had given them clues but no solid answers. The name linked to her bounty, it meant nothing to her. Yet, when she saw it, a chill had crawled down her spine. Who was she? And more importantly, what had she done? As they entered Imperial space, their ship was immediately intercepted. Orin cursed under his breath. "They were expecting us." Lyris's heart pounded as a voice crackled over the comms. "Unidentified vessel, power down and prepare to be boarded." Ethan shot a look at her. "Are you sure about this?" She wasn't. But she nodded anyway. Imperial soldiers stormed the ship, weapons raised. Lyris didn't resist. Neither did Ethan or Orin. Fighting here was suicide. They were taken aboard a massive Imperial dreadnought, cold, metallic, suffocating. Lyris was separated from the others and led through the endless halls by two heavily armored guards. Her pulse raced. And then they stopped. A large door slid open. Inside was a grand chamber, its walls lined with tall windows showing the vastness of space. And at the center, a man. He was older, his uniform crisp, his posture rigid with authority. But it wasn't his presence that made Lyris's breath catch. It was his face. Because something deep inside her recognized him. "Welcome home," he said. The words sent a shiver down her spine. She didn't speak, her throat dry. The man stepped closer. "Do you remember me?" She wanted to say no, but the more she looked at him, the more something in her mind screamed for attention. Flashes of training rooms. Commands spoken in an icy tone. The weight of a weapon in her hands. "Who am I?" she whispered. His expression softened, just for a moment. Then he gestured to the guards. "Leave us." They obeyed, and the door sealed shut behind them. Silence filled the room. "Your name is Lyris Vale," he said. "You were one of our finest." Her stomach twisted. "Finest what?" He studied her. "An operative. A soldier trained from childhood. You carried out missions for the Empire without question. But then..." His voice faltered. "You betrayed us." The air left her lungs. "That's not possible," she said. I don't remember any of that. He nodded. Because we made sure you wouldn't. Her blood turned to ice. We? His gaze darkened. You knew too much. You were too dangerous. When you turned against us, we had no choice but to wipe your memory. Lyris shook her head, stepping back. You're lying. But even as she said it, pieces of her past stirred beneath the surface. A mission. A target. A decision she shouldn't have made. Something had gone wrong. And she had run. I don't understand, she whispered. The man exhaled. You were our greatest weapon. And then you became our greatest threat. Outside, Ethan and Orin were being held in a detention cell. Orin paced. This was a mistake. Ethan leaned against the cold wall. We had no choice. Orin stopped. You really trust her? Ethan hesitated. I trust the person she is now. Not the person she was. Before Orin could respond, the door to their cell opened. 2 soldiers stood there. You're being released. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Why? They didn't answer. As they were escorted out, Ethan's gut told him something was wrong. Back in the chamber, Lyris was spiraling. If I was so dangerous, why not just kill me? The man, her former commander, studied her. Because you weren't just any operative. You were special. He took a step closer. You were my daughter. Her mind reeled. No, she said, shaking her head. That's not. But it was. Deep inside, she knew it was true. She had no memory of it, but the bond was there. And it terrified her. Her father exhaled. I gave the order to erase your past. To keep you from destroying everything we built. Lyris clenched her fists. But I came back. His expression hardened. And now you have to make a choice. He stepped back, gesturing toward the large window overlooking the fleet. Rejoin us, he said. Fulfill the purpose you were created for. Lyris's pulse pounded in her ears. As Ethan and Orin were led through the halls, alarms suddenly blared. The guards looked at each other. And that was all Ethan needed. He grabbed one's weapon, taking him down with a swift hit. Orin elbowed the other, his cybernetic arm sending the soldier crashing into the wall. We have to find Lyris, Ethan said. Orin nodded. Before it's too late. Lyris stared at her father. I don't know who I was, she said. But I know who I am now. His eyes darkened. She took a breath. And I won't go back. He sighed. Then you leave me no choice. Before she could react, pain exploded in her mind. A shock. A command buried deep inside her consciousness. Her father whispered a word. And the world went black. A battle of mind and fate. Darkness. Lyris floated in an empty void. Whispers clawed at the edges of her mind. Memories she didn't remember having. Faces she didn't recognize. Voices giving orders, training her, breaking her. A life stolen. A weapon forged. And then. A command. Wake up. Her body jerked as consciousness slammed into her. She gasped, sucking in air like she had been drowning. Her muscles locked as electricity surged through her veins. But something was wrong. She couldn't move. Her father stood before her, eyes cold. The fail-safe worked, he murmured. Lyris blinked rapidly, trying to force her limbs to obey. But they wouldn't. She was trapped inside her own body. A puppet. Her father studied her like a scientist watching an experiment. The conditioning is still there, he said. Buried beneath your false life. His lips curled into something almost like pride. But you are still mine. No, panic surged in her chest, but her body refused to respond. She was screaming inside, but no sound came out. Meanwhile, Ethan and Oren raced through the dreadnought's halls, alarms blaring around them. Where would they take her? Ethan growled. Oren gritted his teeth. Somewhere secure. Ethan clenched his fists. We don't have time for this. They turned a corner. And nearly ran straight into a group of Imperial soldiers. The moment froze. Then, gunfire erupted. Inside the command chamber, Lyrissa's father stepped forward, tilting his head. You don't feel it yet, he said. But soon, the memories will return. The loyalty. The purpose. His voice softened. You were never meant to run. Lyris wanted to snarl, to tell him he was wrong. But her body stood still. Obeying. Outside, Ethan and Oren fought like men possessed. Blaster shots filled the corridor, sparks flying as they hit metal walls. Oren took down 2 soldiers with his cybernetic arm, sending them crashing into the bulkhead. Ethan moved with lethal precision, his stolen blaster firing with deadly accuracy. They pushed forward, following the sounds of their instincts. Finding her was all that mattered. Inside the chamber, Lyrissa's father pressed a hand to her forehead. His touch sent another shock through her skull. Flashes of a life she didn't want. Missions. Targets. Executions. She had been a ghost in the dark. A weapon with no mercy. But something was different now. Because she wasn't just a weapon anymore. She was something more. Someone more. And she had people who believed in her. A memory surfaced. Ethan's voice, warm and determined. I trust the person you are now. And then another. Oren's smirk. Don't get yourself killed, kid. They were here. Fighting for her. She couldn't let this happen. She wouldn't let this happen. Outside the chamber, Ethan and Oren reached the final checkpoint. A dozen Imperial guards stood in their way. Oren groaned. They really don't want us in there. Ethan set his jaw. Too bad. Then he charged. Inside, Lyrissa's father gave one final command. Kneel. Her body moved. But before her knees could hit the floor, something cracked inside her mind. The control shattered. And her body was hers again. She shot forward, grabbing her father's wrist in a crushing grip. His eyes widened in shock. You. She slammed him against the wall. I'm not yours, she hissed. He struggled, but she didn't let go. Not this time. Never again. The door burst open. Ethan and Oren rushed inside, weapons raised. Lyris turned to them, her chest rising and falling. Their eyes met. She was still her. She had won. But it wasn't over yet. Alarms blared. The Empire wasn't going to let her go. Not without a fight. And she was ready.